Are we recording? Does it show that you're recording?
Yep.
Okay. Hi everyone, I'm Shelley Freeman. We're doing a video today in completion of an assignment that I have for EDU 580 through Georgetown College with Dr. Crystal Brody. This class is being supervised by Dr. Rusalana Westerlund, and this class is ESL Methods and Techniques. So I'm joined here with Miss Jenny Goodenow. She's a 5th grade teacher here in Northern Kentucky, and we are going to talk about some ESL strategies, and we're going to do a little case study of one of the students that we share. So this is sort of one of our collaboration meetings that we have on a weekly basis, and this is a bird's eye view of it. So thanks for joining us. Okay, so just to start out, we're going to start out a little bit with just ELL information to begin with, and then we'll get into some specifics of our students. So we'll start with WEDA, the governing body that gives us the access test that ELLs are assessed with annually. They also give us a lot of training materials, and foremostly they establish standards, just like the classroom teachers have standards that you need to shoot for your, all the kids in your class to meet. There are WEDA standards for English language learners or culturally diverse students that we need to make sure that we're teaching to have all those standards met. So WEDA is this governing body, and so to help us plan our instruction, they have produced what we call can-do descriptors. And so we take the annual access test that students are scored on 1 to 6, 1 being a no English language proficiency and 6 being completely proficient. And we grade them on 4 domains: listening, reading, writing, and speaking. And so they might score a range in there, and then we have a composite for all of that. And we use those numbers, that data, to determine what they can do in the classroom, where you approach it from a positive perspective rather than what their deficits are. So that score gives us the can-do descriptors set for each student. And so here in a minute we'll go over the can-do descriptors for our particular student. So that's what we base our instruction off of, along with some other data, maps and star reading and so forth. But that's the primary ELL vehicle that we use. So the student that we're talking about, as I mentioned, Ms. Goodenow is a 5th grade teacher in a self-contained classroom in Northern Kentucky. And so our case study student is a 5th grader who comes from Togo, Africa. He came with no English at the beginning of the school year. And so Ms. Goodenow experienced frustration for not really feeling equipped to know how best to help him.
Yes.
So to start off with, just a little bit about his background. He came speaking no English, 5th grade. He came with his formal education being in a French-speaking school, so he is well-versed and proficient in French. He also knows his native language of Eve, and then he not writes, but speaks another language that's from his family experience as well. So English is basically his 4th language. So, my goodness.
Yeah.
So his scores, the composite and then the various domains, listening, reading, writing, and speaking, he scored a 1, which we consider entering. Now, this had some months had passed. This was in August. We're now in February. So, but he has progressed nicely. But at that time, he scored a 1, entering in each of the domains. So that gave him a composite of 1. So what that means is, according to the WEDA standards, they break it down into sort of usable chunks. So if you're giving them an assignment in which they would have to recount information, you would look at this can-do descriptor, and it says can-do descriptors, key use of recount. They also have key use of explain. So if he's doing an assignment where he would have to explain himself, explain his knowledge, you would use this set of can-do descriptors. And then we have key use of argue for an argumentative assignment, and then the key use of discuss in his speaking ability. So just for an example, the key use of recount descriptors in the listening domain, he should be able to process recounts by matching oral words and phrases to context-related pictures or objects, which is where we started. Right. Yeah, matching pictures and words is a great place to start. So identifying the topic in oral statements. That's when he's beginning to put those pictures and words together and express himself, which we've seen him move through already this school year. Speaking, he should be able to. We expect him to be able to recount by stating keywords and phrases associated with the content using visual or graphic support. So basically what that means is there's so much verbiage and a lot of content that we have, but if we provide him with vocabulary, visuals of background information that might connect to something that he does know from his background, any kind of visual that we can give them to support, that should be able to then use those visuals to produce his own knowledge. Does that make sense?
Right,
That
yeah.
way?
Yeah.
So, and then that's the speaking category domain. And then reading, he can identify words in context during oral reading. So when we read to him, he might hear a word that he knows. He's like, oh, I know that word, you know. And so he might be able to then pick those words out. And then he might be able to highlight familiar phrases from those words. That's reading. And then writing, we expect him to be able to communicate his personal experiences through drawings and words, which he does, yeah. Reproducing a series of events through illustrated text. And so, and now thankfully he's even moved beyond that level. So that's just an example of how you can use can-do descriptors to know what to expect from them at the level that the scores have shown you that he can do, and then you can design instruction, or you can fill in gaps that may not be there. And so, and it just helps to know what to expect.
Yeah,
You're like, how in the world do I assess? So, we talked about his educational background. So getting into the lesson that we're going to talk about today is a book project. So you give your students a monthly book project, and then it's an AR book, Accelerated Reader book, and they choose that within their range of reading level, and then they get to choose from a menu of different ways to express their knowledge.
Yes.
And so he has chosen, well, let me back up a little bit. So the book that I encouraged him to get, it was about a scientific study of elephants in Africa, which is where he's from. So it's good to try to relate the content you can to their background experience, just like you would for any other student, but it's especially important for ELLs. And so, and even with scaffolding that and providing visuals and graphic organizers, which are all good strategies, it was just too overwhelming for him. And so I agreed to go back and let him choose a Magic Treehouse book, which Tigers at Twilight. So, and it's slightly above his reading level based on this data, his most recent MAPS test, and a STAR reading test. It's slightly above his reading level. So I read it aloud to him. Or you could read it aloud to him, and that way they're listening for those familiar verse words and phrases and so forth. So, so here we have for just an example, I have a table here that lists the 1 month's menu options that you offered them. They could produce a travel brochure. That's a great assignment for ELLs because it's full of visuals, and that gives them a sense of accomplishment and competency. So a travel brochure with, of course, you know, they would have enough text in it, but the research could be even engaging for him, because if it's especially a setting that he knows or he's familiar with, then he can use the visuals to jumpstart some content. You allow them to make up a game where they use their text structure, problem, and solution. They might make a diorama to illustrate an important event in the story. That's another good visual for both the game and the diorama are great for ELLs because it's all visuals. So those are great things. Puppet show, where they illustrate their characters, and then of course writing a letter to one of the characters in your book, which is great for a lot of the students. That's exactly what they love to do. So, and I love how you already are just intuitively providing all these visual things that are great for ELLs. And so to start off the assignment, what I would say that first of all is to simplify the language in the assignment itself. So define any unfamiliar terms and let him translate them in his native language so that he has a good understanding. of the key words, the most important words in each of the options. And also if you can provide visuals. For example, travel brochure, if you can collect travel brochures to let them see a real travel brochure, you give them that realia, then that's even better. But at least pull up pictures on the internet to show him examples of dioramas. Sometimes they're in another classroom in the building, or you can get pictures on the line, on the internet. And then, so any way that you can provide realia for him to just give them a concrete, tangible idea of what the assignment is. And then, of course, the same thing with simplifying the language of the rubric, because in this case, he's just barely beyond a newcomer stage. He doesn't have the academic vocabulary yet, so, which rubrics are full of academic vocabulary. So that's definitely an important thing to simplify. Okay, and then we get into the nuts and the bolts of the assignment. So, again, based on his reading scores, reading, listening, speaking, and writing from the WIDA Access test, he tested at a 1. So that affords him some accommodations when you're giving him assignments or when you're assessing him. And so in this case, we've already gone over this before, but for the sake of our video, he gets extended time, which in this building means double time. So he gets extended time to do an assignment, which in this case, he's probably working on last month's book project because of the time it takes to modify. Simplified language in the assignments and the rubric, using a bilingual dictionary, which he has his Chromebook with him a lot, and so we bookmarked the translator. So, and then also keeping a personal picture dictionary in his binder all the time of any new words that he learns. He can write that in English and in French, and then maybe even do a sketch of it. So, or he can write a summary. Now that he's progressing, I'm encouraging him to add in summary, like phrases. They don't have to be complete sentences, but the more he can put in his own personal repertoire, the better. He receives a reader. So in this case, the book level was a little bit higher than him, so I read to him. Sometimes we just can't help but get around that. Pre-teaching the key vocabulary. Again, translating and visuals are the key to pre-teaching the vocabulary for any given assignment. And also accessing his background knowledge as much as you possibly can, because that's just good teaching. You do that with all of your students. So, but whereas a lot of students, that's going to push them forward with ELLs, it's absolutely necessary.
Right.
Collaborative discussion with small groups. So, and I see this happen in your classroom too, where you put peers in groups with him where they're capable peers, and so he can ask questions and he can listen to them, and they can sort of enrich each other that way. So that's a great thing to do. I see that happening in your room a lot. And then the visual just supports. Graphic organizers are huge. Venn diagrams and KWL charts, which is great for accessing the background knowledge. And then again, simplified language. So it sort of gives you some guidelines for designing instruction and assessments. So the objectives of the assignment, there were a lot of objectives in the assignment. So there, you wanted students to be able to identify the setting of a story. You wanted them to be able to identify the text structure, problem solution, cause and effect, and so forth. You wanted them to be able to identify a sequence of events in the plot, and you wanted them to be able to analyze the characters by their character traits and details in the story. So the way that I applied, I want to tie in the English language standards to your objectives. These are the standards I mentioned at the beginning of our talk that WIDA established, that we need to make sure that we're using as a guideline for what our kids at each level need to know. And so, just for an example, I know this can be overwhelming, but when you talk about identifying the setting, that ties in with the English Language Development Standard 2 from WIDA, and they call it the language of language arts. So it's getting them to learn those important academic vocabulary. So you're talking about the setting of the story, and so he's beginning to understand that academic language of setting. So that's how we tie these standards, and ELL teachers can help tremendously and collaborate with making sure that these are being tied together, your objectives and the WIDA standards. So That's where the collaboration is important, because the ELL teachers can't know every grade level standard by heart, and you can't know every ELL standard by heart. So that's why collaboration is so important. So for this particular assignment, front loading was huge, I think. So simplifying the language and the directions of the assignment and the rubric, translating key vocabulary into French in this case, and then graphic organizers. So for example, summarizing the book, it's good for him to have a graphic organizer to summarize each chapter as he goes, that then he can look back on at the end of the book for the finished product. Right. So graphic organizers are super key for ELLs. So that would be on my front loading, on the planning side to front load for that assignment. And then I mentioned before, being able to provide realia like actual travel brochures or actual games, puppet shows, or like I said, looking it up online and showing them examples. So that he knows what the expectation is. Right. So in this case, the story is Tigers at Twilight, and the setting is the jungles of India. So and lots of wild animals, so which we know he loves. Yeah. So that was another reason that I agreed to this book being, an okay selection for him, because it was engaging for him. And so and in this case, we looked up pictures. You can look up pictures of whatever setting is in the selection, or if it's a nonfiction, that's even easier to look up a setting for. So anytime you can connect to their home culture, home language, the even better. This is why I wanted him to do the Africa book to begin with. But so we know that he loves animals. We know that he's enamored with the whole the jungles and researching countries, and so that's something that I would definitely tie into the lesson. Like, well, let's compare these pictures of India to your home in Africa. How are they similar? How are they different? And so those are good ways to stretch him. And of course, there's vocabulary in the book, even at that reading level, that he needs to translate. So another thing that we want to do with ELLs is to make sure that we're hitting all 4 domains in the assignments that he does as much as possible: the reading, writing, listening, and speaking. Be aware of academic language that to us is second nature, but to an ELL it's obviously foreign. So does that make sense? It can be sort of overwhelming, I'm sure.
And this is kind of what you mean when you talk about that standard language of language arts, like it's these
the language
of
language
vocabulary
arts.
words.
The language of mathematics. And so in order to really get the rich content knowledge that they need, they really need to be able to speak that language, just to speak like a mathematician, to speak like a historian or an author. And so the only way they can do that is the rich academic vocabulary. And so that takes very proactive, intentional, just explicit teaching sometimes.
Yeah.
And so teacher talk is another thing, which I know you're teaching. That's how you talk with your students constantly on an ongoing basis. And so these other strategies that I mentioned, just you will, like, as you're talking, incorporate those as much as possible, which you probably already do a lot of. But connecting to background knowledge, something comes up, you're like, oh, I know this hits close to home with him. And so you want to just make sure that you're affirming their culture as valuable, and to the classmates that it's a mutually enriching experience. So materials and texts we've already discussed. So that's the nuts and bolts of the lesson. Does that make sense? Do you have any questions about that? I mean, a lot of this you and I have talked about. Right. On an ongoing basis as it is. But so any questions?
I don't think so. Well, okay, one, as far as, like if I were to do these modifications for him for like in-class assignments, I think that's the part where, where through our collaboration is finding a manageable way to do these types of things with him in, when he's not just working with you or just, working with me. but it all makes perfect sense. But to be able to try to embed those things within, like him working with a cooperative group or, you know, in the whole group
So
setting.
it's a whole nother level of differentiations
Right,
that
yeah.
so which there's already so much of that
Right.
to do, and so I think that the important thing is to do maybe choose a strategy or two at a time to incorporate in, and the more you do it, just like everything else in teaching, the more
Right.
it will become your nature of teaching, and so don't expect yourself to go in there and be an ELL teacher immediately, and that's why we've got collaboration.
Right,
So,
right,
'cause I couldn't
yeah.
go in and teach your fifth grade content the way you are.
Right,
So
yeah.
just take it in little chunks and take advantage of the collaboration,
Yeah.
and it will come, you know. It all falls together
Yeah.
after a while of practice, experience, just like everything else.
Right. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
Anything else you want to talk about or cover?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I mean, it makes perfect sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Oh.
All right. Thank you all for joining us.
All right.